Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about I'm Thinking of Ending Things. Before we begin, let me know in the comments if you were looking forward to this or what your thoughts were if you've seen it already, and make sure to give this a thumbs up if you like these reviews. It helps me out immensely if you do that. Also, if you're new here and you like movies, whether it be blockbusters, hidden gems, or everything in between, please consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases and some classics. But now, let's jump right into it. This film stars Jessie Buckley as a young woman who's thinking of ending her relationship with her boyfriend Jake, played by Jesse Plemons, but she decides to go on a trip with him to meet his parents, played by Toni, Collette, and Thewlis. On the trip, she becomes unsettled by images she sees around the house and begins to question both him and herself. So if you've seen my other videos, this is going to be a little different as it's divided into two main sections, spoiler-free and spoilers. I normally do spoiler-free videos for new releases while I do spoilers for most of my videos of older movies, but it's almost impossible to properly discuss this film and why I feel the way I feel about it without getting into spoilers. I have these timestamped, so we'll start with the spoiler-free section, and if you want to see the movie first before getting into spoilers, you can skip ahead to my closing thoughts and rating. But anyway, here we go. This film is written and directed by Charlie Kaufman, whose movies, for the most part, I really enjoy. He wrote great films such as Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Adaptation, and Being John Malkovich, all pretty surreal movies but still emotionally compelling stories. He also directed two films, both of which he wrote as well. One is Anomalisa, which fits that same surreal but emotionally compelling trend, but I'm Thinking of Ending Things reminds me of the first movie Kaufman directed called Synecdoche, New York, which was also very surreal but at the same time very polarizing. I didn't exactly dislike that movie, but I also didn't particularly care for it either. And that's more or less where I stand with this movie as well. So let's start with the positives. From a technical standpoint, it's excellent. That's one thing that's constant about all of Kaufman's movies. It's shot beautifully. Many scenes look like there's something out of a painting. Like this mostly takes place when it's snowing outside, and there are a lot of scenes where they're out in the snow and it'll be partially lit, or the camera's angled above them, and it looks great. From an acting standpoint, again, it's excellent. It can't be understated how good all four of the main performances were. Jessie Buckley gives hands down the best performance among everyone. She makes the character very compelling and we get inside her head a lot. This is extensively narrated by her, and while I'm normally not a huge fan of narration in film, the way it's handled here serves as a contrast to her actions. Her narration tells us she's thinking of ending this relationship while we see her putting on a friendly face during this dinner and pretending everything's alright. Jesse Plemons is also very good here. He really sells how much of a nice guy Jake is. He comes off very natural in their conversations, especially as Jessie Buckley explains in the narration. He doesn't fully understand what she does, but he's at least supportive and he's interested in what she has to say. And it's a strong contrast with how we see him interact with his parents. There's a lot of tension between them, though we don't fully know why, and we see him trying to maintain his composure during the dinner. And both Toni Collette and Thewlis do an excellent job. We see they try to be friendly, but they don't exactly have any sort of social grace. They laugh almost too hard at their own jokes. He can be somewhat crass, and she can be a little intrusive with her questions. Both actors gave these characters such distinct personalities. And watching all four of them interact was really well done. This dinner takes up the first third of the film, and this is hands down the strongest part. You really feel the tension in the room. There's clearly a lot of animosity among the family, and again, you're not sure why, and meanwhile you have Jessie Buckley who's trying to hold it all together, but at the same time is also considering ending this relationship herself, and it just leaves you intrigued as to what's going to happen next. The lead up to this dinner I also found to be really well done. It's mainly the car ride on the way over, and it's a very long, very dialogue heavy sequence as we learn a little bit about both Buckley and Plemons. They had great chemistry. I got invested in them very quickly. Like I said, the contrasting narration really added a lot, and it painted both characters in a very sympathetic light. Plus, there's a lot of mystery that's built up in this first act that I thought was really well done. It's definitely made clear from early on that there's a lot more to this world than meets the eye. In the first few minutes, Buckley's thinking and we hear her narration, and then Plemons cuts in and says, "Did you say something?" as if he was responding to her narration. Then we see things such as the picture on the wall in the house where Plemons says it's him as a child, but Buckley sees herself as a child. We also see Buckley's name change multiple times, and the story of how they met also changes. First she goes by Lucy, then Lucia, then Louisa. She goes from being an arts major to a poet to a film student. It's never consistent. Like his other films, Kaufman once again builds up this surreal world full of intrigue and mystery, and because the film establishes a lot of compelling characters from the moment we meet them, we're invested. Unfortunately for me, this film didn't pay off with a very satisfying conclusion. It just wasn't there emotionally. As this film progresses, it speaks in more and more abstract terms. Things become very surreal, the narrative keeps shifting, we cut the things happening away away from the main story, and it becomes just too much. Even though this was released the same week as Tenet, I'm glad I waited a week to watch this because Tenet was a somewhat confusing movie too, but this makes Tenet look like the most straightforward movie I've ever seen. This film will never spell anything out for you, and I appreciate that. It acts more as this giant puzzle. However, it didn't work for me because it doesn't give you enough clues so that you're able to properly put the puzzle together. And because of that, you're not left with a satisfying ending. The last act leaves you with a lot of questions, which normally isn't a bad thing when a movie's over. I like a good movie where it leaves things open for discussion, but this film dives into some truly surreal territory that felt more self-indulgent than anything and leaves you with little guidance. It's more a series of non sequiturs than it is a conclusion to a story. And with that, we're now going to get into the spoiler section of the movie. Again, if you haven't seen it yet and don't want to know anything, don't watch this part of the video. I'm also going to be discussing spoilers for the book as well. So if you wanted to read the book first and don't want to be spoiled, I have this timestamped, so just skip ahead to my final thoughts and score. But now, let's talk some spoilers. So as we see throughout the movie, it'll cut back and forth to these images of an elderly janitor in a school. We don't know who he is at first. We'll see him at home, we'll see him watching a movie, we'll see him pass by dancing in the hallway at the school, and we don't know what this is all about. But we soon get this sense that he's connected to the main story somehow when Buckley gets a phone call and it's from someone named Yvonne. Now Yvonne is also a character in the movie the janitor's watching, and then at one point Buckley becomes Yvonne for like a minute, so we know something's up. As this was going on, my theory was that this is in the janitor's head, and it turned out I was correct. In the third act, Buckley and Plemons get to the school and they get separated, and Buckley meets the janitor and she tells him that nothing ever really happened between her and Plemons the night they met, which explains why the story of how they met kept changing earlier on during the dinner. So pretty much none of what we saw up until this point actually happened. And then the narrative begins to shift once more. The two Jessies reconvene at the school, and then two more actors dressed similar to them step on, and we get this very elaborate dance sequence, which then turns into this fight. And then we cut back to the janitor in his car. He starts suffering hallucinations, including this animated maggot-infested pig, voiced by Oliver Platt, by the way. And they have this conversation before finally cutting back to Jesse Plemons, now older, in this auditorium with all these characters, and he's accepting the Nobel Prize, he gives a speech and sings a song, and the movie ends. And not only is it a lot, it all feels like everything's unrelated. It just jumps from one thing to the next with no rhyme or reason, and it still leaves you with the number one question. Who is this janitor, and why was cutting to him at the end so important? Well, it's never explicitly said in the movie, but it turns out the janitor and Jesse Plemons' character, Jake, are actually one and the same. So now this explains why Jake is the only one among the four main characters whose name sticks. Toni, Collette, and David Thewlis are never explicitly mentioned by name, they just go by mom and dad, and Jessie Buckley goes through a bunch of different names. So what the first 2/3 of the movie are he's imagining what life would have been like with this one woman who he met at a bar. Or she could even possibly be an amalgamation of multiple women he attempted to date, which could explain why her name shifted multiple times. Now this is an interesting concept, I'll give it that much credit. Jake ended up living his life alone, he deals heavily with that loneliness and regret. There were scenes while at the parents' house where they suddenly got older, then younger, then older again. So while most of the movie is in Jake's head, there were elements of his actual life sprinkled in there, and that also explains a little bit of the animosity we saw that he has towards his parents. He felt like he was stuck with them. My issue with all this is that, like I said, the fact that Jake and the janitor are the same person is never explicitly stated in the movie. I only knew that because I looked up how the book went. I didn't actually read the book, but I was left so confused by what I just saw that I needed to do a deep dive and find out. And I didn't need the movie to spell things out for me. Like I said, I like when a movie shows you things, it gives you enough clues, and lets you put the pieces of the puzzle together yourself. But again, it didn't give you enough. The movie constantly treats both Jake and the janitor as two separate people. Even if you look up a plot synopsis of this, it never explicitly says this. Only the book synopsis says this. You essentially get one hint, which is you see the janitor's clothes in Jake's house early on, but that's the only thing that nudges you even remotely in that direction. And really, it's a blink and you miss it moment early on in the movie. And really, that's how most of this movie operates. You need to pay attention at essentially all times, otherwise you're going to be even more lost. The janitor is played by a totally different actor, and he's only seen sparingly, and we don't really know much about him. I think what would drive the point across better would be using Jesse Plemons in makeup or digitally aging him for those scenes. Because then, for those of us who haven't read the book, we could have said, I see Jake, he's older, he's by himself, he's living alone, Buckley's character isn't there anymore, what happened? Or you could have even done like a face blending moment, like a shot of the janitor in one scene, and then the scene cross dissolves back to Jesse Plemons in a similar position, just something to give us better context. Because I really do like the themes Kaufman was going for. They're themes people can relate to, but when we're told that nearly everything we just saw for the last hour and a half or so didn't actually happen, and it just shifts focus to this janitor who's treated like a separate character and isn't someone we built up a proper connection with, it feels like a massive waste of time. We're left with this feeling of, why were we following these characters if none of this happened? what was the point? And it's a shame because I cared for these characters. I enjoyed their interactions, there was all this mystery, and I wanted to know more. And the movie kind of just leaves us high and dry, and we don't get any sort of real payoff, nor are we given enough to allow us to piece these things together for that payoff. Lastly, to explain the point of the elaborate dance sequence as well as the very last scene, both turned out to be references to the musical Oklahoma. Jake says earlier on while they're in the car he's a fan of the musical, so the dance is supposed to be reminiscent of a scene in Oklahoma, while the song he sings at the end is Lonely Room from the musical, which you're not going to know unless you've actually seen Oklahoma, and I haven't. I had to look it up. And the acceptance speech he gives at the end is actually taken from A Beautiful Mind, and if you're wondering why, well, it's because we get a quick shot of a bunch of books in Jake's room at one point, and on top of all those books is a DVD of A Beautiful Mind. It's very quick, and like everything else, it's easy to miss. And you essentially need to have seen and remembered both the movie as well as Oklahoma to pick up on any of those references in the last scene. It's interesting. When it comes to adaptations, remakes, reboots, whatever it is, I think the movie should be judged in its own right and not be criticized simply for just not being the original source material. Here though, the only reason you're able to fully understand everything that goes on, you're almost required to read the book first to even have a remote understanding of this, especially the third act. And while there were great ideas in here, I just think it's weak storytelling when you need some sort of companion piece by your side in order to fully understand the work. And it just makes for a disappointing experience. Overall, I don't hate this movie, but I didn't particularly care for it either. There are a lot of great ideas brought up, it's beautifully shot, and has 4 great performances, and it opens strong with an intriguing first hour or so. However, the film leaves things too vague and too abstract, and while it makes sense when you piece everything together, you're required to read up on it in order to fully wrap your head around what Kaufman was going for. And to me, that's not strong storytelling. I'm not going to necessarily say to stay away, but I'm not giving a recommendation either. I'm Thinking of Ending Things gets a 6 out of 10. And that rating is exclusively because I really liked the first hour and I really enjoyed all the performances. And if there's any way I would recommend this movie, it would be exclusively for them. But I don't see myself revisiting this, and I totally understand if you tell me you don't like it, because it leaves you hanging. Let me know though, did you see I'm Thinking of Ending Things, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? If you read the book, did you like it more than the book, less than the book? And what movie adaptation have you seen that you found to be better than the book? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll catch you next time.